What would John do? Welcome back to Q&A with me. Collect your questions off Instagram stories, or if you left some down below, I pulled from there. And today, the common thread, and I think this will be the forever question, is around volume and training splits. So let's dive into some questions. First question, I promise again, I'll try not to take too long on these. As you progress as a lifter, should volume change per workout? And if we looked across someone's like entirety of their lifting career, when you're early on beginning lifter, you don't need a lot of stimulus per workout. A little bit goes a long way. This is why typically full body workouts are recommended. As you get a little bit of stimulus all over the body, you recover quick because it wasn't that fatiguing. Then you repeat that. And that's why if like a full day, 3 body split works well. Now, at some point, that amount of stimulus is not going to be adequate, and you'll also have a rise in strength, and that same session is going to get longer and longer because it takes more time to warm up for your sets, and then your total fatigue is going to be really high, so your last part of that session could get a bit subpar in volume and stimulating those muscle groups. So that's when you do need to break apart the split, add more volume allocated within a session just for one body part, and then have a few extra days between training it. This is when you start going into like an upper lower split, and that can last someone for a very long time. But we would see the total volume for the week absolutely would increase, but the span of this time is going to be fairly extended for quite a bit. And then the same thing kind of happens if like you're going to find yourself to where you might need more volume, especially for certain muscle groups is what I think comes into play, where you'll see where weaknesses are there and other muscle groups may be growing really fast comparatively to others, and you might need to get more into specialized split design where you might do something like a push-pull legs. And so we can have more volume allocated to that certain muscle group that takes a lot of stimulus to grow, and then you can have other sessions that have reductions in volume. But once you're kind of within this point, I think that total volume, you might see it be coming back down for certain muscle groups and then periods of coming back up for other muscle groups. Next question, when you up volume for weak areas, do you do it in 2-3 stages planned in your mesocycle? Oh, okay. So asking that if you were to move into another block of training, say you wanted to bring up chest now, and you've been following some type of maybe upper lower split, and now you need to put more focus into just chest, and would you be maybe backing down volume in other areas potentially? But with that volume increase to chest, they're asking if week by week, should you slowly incrementally increase this, or do you just throw it all in week one? And how I would program this would probably be starting with that volume level. But usually my week one is kind of more of an introductory week, and I typically would start this even on a deload week to where the volume's in place, but the effort's kind of dialed back. So you have a little bit of introduction, then that next week you're pushing a little harder. Then by week 2, you're like full effort level at this new volume level. Now you absolutely could do it another way where kind of week 1 is like a volume level that's from between where you're trying to get up to peak wise and what you started with. Then like that second week, you could jump fully into the next volume level and then ride that out. I'm more of a proponent of not doing vast volume increases and being able to just incrementally increase like block by block. I think that's representative too of what you see in the research. Usually they're looking at like an 8-week block of training with this volume increase. And there's one study that comes to mind, I can't remember it, but it was basically they took volume leg by leg. So they were both doing leg extensions. One leg would get just a standardized amount of volume. The other leg would get a 20% increase in volume based on their previous training program. And for some people, just the standard volume that they went with, it was actually a reduction in volume and they reduced leg size. Some people, it was too much of an increase in the reduced leg size. The 20% increase in volume was a really good point for these people to actually get good progress to occur for that leg. So from a starting point, probably somewhere like a 20 to 30% increase in volume to a weak body part that is seemed to be slower in growth would be reasonable, and to hold that volume for 8 weeks. And I think that volume addition wouldn't require you to incrementally have to increase the volume over weeks compared to like I need to double my volume yet. And I think that could be quickly jumping in to the deep end. So say you're doing 10 sets across the week for chest, you're going to add 2 to 3 sets. That's so easy to recover from, opposed to you doing now 20 sets. And I don't think you need to do that big of a jump. The caveat being that you had some type of sufficient volume and progress that has been occurring, and you weren't in this some type of suboptimal program before. They say like, well, John, I want to grow the most. I want to do all the volume for chest. I really need it to grow. And just realize like there is just a time component to increasing to that. And I think you don't need to do it all in one training block, that you might have like, maybe that's 3 8-week blocks where you're increasing it and you're getting more and more stimulus. And you're kind of milking the most from the least amount of volume. And I think just to keep an idea around this too, is like weak body parts, usually along these blocks, you can keep improving execution. You might also be changing, like finding new exercises that just engage those muscle groups better for you. So that's my thought around it. Thoughts on the whole new hype around 4 to 7 reps in high frequency. So I don't know if this is the new hype. This has to be coming from, it's got to be from like, from Jordan Peters. He's does an upper lower split, trains fairly low rep. But if you align this with the evidence, even in the literature, it coordinates really well. Like we see higher frequency programs are more productive for hypertrophy than once per week body part training. And I feel like you can make a pretty hard draw on the line in the sand for that type of statement, with some caveats. Like for people that respond really well, like the bro split, absolutely can work. You know, the issue is like once you need enough volume in a session, you're going to destroy yourself in a session, and it's not going to take you 7 days to recover. I mean, just think logically about this. Like if you train chest, anyone that loves the bro split, like just try to remove yourself emotionally from it a little bit and think about when could you actually train chest again once you're recovered from that chest day once per week. And I know a lot of people are going to say like 3 to 4 days later, I absolutely could train it again. Certain muscle groups, maybe not. But if you can stimulate that same thing again, that same muscle group again, you're going to get double the stimulus and you're going to grow at a faster rate. Like this seems pretty obvious. What happens when you have some vast training session is that you might need more volume. However, it's so fatiguing that volume at the end of the session is no longer that productive. And now by the time you actually recover 3-4 days later, you actually start reducing the adaptations and having atrophy occur in the next session, to where now you have this, adaptation to hypertrophy, then you're losing some of the adaptations to where you're just like not getting a lot of growth out of that muscle group, versus stimulating it, not as much volume, recover, stimulate it, recover, and you can have a further increase in hypertrophy that way for sure. So a higher frequency to a degree absolutely will outperform like single set volume per week, even with like volume equated. I would say once you're up into the higher ranks. Okay. Now, can you get too frequent? Yes. I think you do need a degree of an amount of stimulus in a session to grow once you're more advanced. This is not the same if you're a beginner. Like I mentioned earlier, like you get a little stimulus and you grow. That's not going to be the case for when you're someone more advanced. Like one set might not just cut it for some muscle groups. You might need a few more sets, and that is going to require you having a split that's maybe not as frequent, so you have time to recover. So if you're training, like some muscle groups absolutely could train every other day. Some are going to need like 3 days between, but doing something more high frequency, I think that aligns with where we see people being really productive, and also even with the evidence too. Now, the 4 to 7 rep range, typically starting to get down into the lower rep ranges, you do start getting more towards you're probably not accumulating a lot of those stimulating reps if the reps are too low. I would also have concern around managing connective tissue stress, and some movements just not being as efficacious for low rep work. If you're not well off of being able to execute, like say a barbell squat for 4 set of 4, and to get enough of those stimulating reps, it's usually you needing to, and what we see in the research is also needing to get a little higher in rep ranges. But I mean, if 5 could be at the bottom end, like it's not that much higher. 6, like it's not going to be vastly different. I think if you're only restricting yourself to this rep range across every single movement, I think that's where it might be problematic if you're not like a really high executor and dialed in with your recovery. Like I don't know Jordan's exact program here, but he is dialed in, and I don't think everyone's going to be dialed in to be able to execute like he does. And maybe he prefers that rep range. Perfectly fine, but don't think that you need to be stuck to that. Maybe you have some movements that are in the lower rep range work of 4 to 7 reps, but then you have some other rep ranges that you get along better with doing some higher rep work, and potentially there's some other benefits around hypertrophy working in some higher rep ranges. But I think some movements you just connect better with and they're safer with doing in slightly higher reps. But for the most part, for most of your hypertrophy work is going to be from 6 to probably 12 rep ranges. Like that hasn't changed in years. Like this has always been the hypertrophy rep range. And there's more research that comes out that kind of keeps validating that. Yeah, you could go a little bit higher, but you're not going to be, constituting your whole program. Could you go lower? Yeah, sure. But you're also getting into kind of like more strength type of based programming. So a higher frequency, yes, probably staying within the 6 to 12 rep range. Yeah, that's where I think the evidence lies and makes a lot of sense for programming. Okay, last question. Is there a minimum amount of free weight exercises someone should be doing? And no, not necessarily. Free weights don't necessarily make you grow more than machines or vice versa. However, I think having the skill and proficiency to be able to internally brace and move with a less brace movement is very important, because in bodybuilding, we primarily work a lot in the sagittal plane. It's all like front to back movements. If you think about it, like think about walking lunges or presses or pulls. Like we don't do anything in this lateral plane. So when we're getting into more braced patterns, more machine-based patterns, they control a lot of this lateral movement for us. So we lose some of the strength and ability to brace. So if you ever get into positions where you're challenged laterally, that's where injuries can happen, because you have weaknesses within your ability to execute the lifts, and you start loading tissues will start getting overloaded to control these patterns that aren't supposed to be, and where you get compensations. And then this results in injuries occurring from here. This happens to me. I had injuries occur and just overuse stuff happening, and I move away from free weights to more machines, and I don't have the ability to use free weights safely and proficiently. And then I get injured in machines because I get so strong in a machine that now still those same weaknesses are still the limiting factors. So I think it's very important to always maintain the ability to execute free weights. You don't have to have them for producing hypertrophy, but I think from an ability for safety and function and carryover to all your other lifts, I think they're an important part to have. So that might be in the off season, you move into at least on one training day, you have some type of free weight movement that can be present if you can execute that properly and it aligns with your development goals. So this might still having like a dumbbell press, still having some type of like dumbbell based row, or even some type of single arm type row that counters this kind of anti-rotation strength that you need. The dumbbell press helps with having to maintain scapular stability in a free weight movement, and then some type of squat or even a hip hinge. I think through those would be a lot. Some people might need more of probably a single leg type movement, or even a contralateral split squat. That way it does challenge that anti-rotation and strengthens the lateral sides of the hips. I think those things can go a long way for progressing someone. You get hypertrophy out of these movements, absolutely, but also you challenge that transverse plane and that frontal plane that we don't train a lot in for bodybuilding. I also think just doing like planks would be huge for bodybuilders. It's a simple one, but I think it'll even translate and carry over to being able to have some more lateral strength. So you don't have to do all free weights. I actually don't think an all free weight program is really ideal, because the limitations around connective tissue loading. Can it be done? Yeah, absolutely. You can make progress in a home gym if you only have free weights, for sure. I just think there's so many great machines out now with variable loading and the ability to like not have to accumulate so much connective tissue issues with the limitation of only using like barbells that might move better and align better for you. And that's what I found when like COVID happened, and Renee and I, we got a home gym, like a power rack. We had dumbbells. Holy crap. The first week I was so beat up just from like just so much barbell work, because the barbell was so limiting and forcing me into a range that wasn't mechanically aligning best for me. Like I needed something that could have a bit of supination in my presses or even in my rows that I just couldn't get with just such a limited setup. So anyway, I think it'd be great in all your beginning sessions that you have some free weight exercise. Then you can move to machines afterwards as your fatigue's kind of setting in. You need something more externally braced. Anyway, those are the questions for the day, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in. Leave some other questions down below, and I'll talk to you next time.